What if the walls of a house could remember the horrors that happen within them? And what if they could make you remember too? Tonight, we're stepping through the doors of three of America's most haunted homes. These aren't just ghost stories, they are grim histories of what and who was left behind. We'll start in a place known for its elegant facade and the chamber of horrors that was hidden behind it. A curse built on Gallows ground. He watched a man choke to death, then built a nursery over his grave. In Old Town, San Diego, sits a handsome brick home, a California historical landmark that once served as the city's courthouse, first commercial theater, and a general store. But before it was any of those things, the land it was built on was a place of death. This is the Whaley House, and its story begins not with a family, but with an execution. In 1852, a man named James Robinson, better known as Yankee Jim, was convicted of grand larceny and sentenced to hang. The gallows were set up on a desolate patch of land, and among the crowd that gathered to watch was a local entrepreneur named Thomas Whaley. He watched as the execution was horribly botched. Because of Yankee Jim's height, the drop didn't break his neck, and he was left to slowly strangle to death for nearly half an hour. 3 years later, in an act of stunning indifference, Thomas Whaley bought that very same plot of land to build a home for his family. Almost immediately after they moved in, the hauntings began. The family reported hearing the loud, heavy footsteps of a large man stomping through the house, which they attributed to the ghost of Yankee Jim. But the curse of the land seemed to attach itself to the family itself. Soon after moving in, their 18-month-old son, Thomas Jr., died of scarlet fever in the house. A few years later, their daughter Violet was married to a con man who abandoned her just 2 weeks into their marriage. Riddled with public humiliation and depression, 22-year-old Violet took her own life inside the home, shooting herself in the chest. The house became a container for the family's grief. Thomas and his wife Anna would both eventually die within its walls. Over the decades, the home has earned its reputation as America's most haunted house. Visitors report a catalog of sorrows. The spectral figure of Thomas Whaley at the window, the scent of his wife Anna's perfume, the sound of a baby crying, and the heartbreaking apparition of a young woman in a Victorian dress, believed to be the eternally grieving spirit of Violet. The heavy footsteps of Yankee Jim are still heard on the upper floors, forever pacing the ground where his life was taken. The house is not just a home, but a monument to tragedies that refuse to be buried. And still, Yankee Jim walks, louder every year. If you thought that was chilling, wait until you hear about what happened in Iowa. A crime that never slept. 8 lives ended in silence. One clue, a slab of bacon. Our next story takes us to a small, quiet town in Iowa, and to a house where an entire family was lost in a single, brutal night. On June 9, 1912, the home of the Moore family in Villisca was a picture of peaceful, small-town life. Josiah and Sarah Moore, their 4 children, and 2 young friends of their daughter, Lena and Ina Stillinger, had just returned from a church service. 8 people, 6 of them children, went to sleep that night, completely unaware they would never wake up. The next morning, a neighbor noticed the house was unusually still. Worried, she contacted Josiah's brother, Ross, who let himself into the house. He first discovered the bodies of the 2 visiting girls, Lena and Ina, in a downstairs bedroom. He ran out, shouting for the town marshal, saying someone had been murdered. What authorities found inside was a scene of unparalleled brutality. All 8 people in the house had been bludgeoned to death with an axe. The killer had moved methodically through the house, from the parents' upstairs bedroom to the children's room, and finally downstairs. The faces of every victim were covered with bed sheets or clothing. The ceilings in the children's and parents' rooms had gouges from the upswing of the axe. Josiah Moore's face had been hit so many times, it was completely unrecognizable. The investigation was, by modern standards, a catastrophe. The crime scene was quickly contaminated as hundreds of curious townspeople walked through the house. Several strange clues only deepened the mystery. Accounts suggest mirrors in the house had been covered with cloths. A slab of bacon was on the floor near the bloody axe. A bowl of bloody water on the kitchen table suggested the killer had washed their hands before leaving. In the attic, 2 spent cigarettes were found, leading to the theory that the killer may have hidden there, waiting for the family to fall asleep. Despite a lengthy investigation and several suspects, no one was ever convicted. There was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling minister with a history of mental illness, who even confessed to the crime before being acquitted. Other suspects included a state senator who was a business rival of Josiah's, and even a possible serial killer thought to be responsible for similar axe murders in other states. But over a century later, the Villisca Axe murders remain completely unsolved. The house, now known as the Villisca Axe Murder House, stands as a grim monument to the tragedy. It's open for tours and overnight stays for those brave enough to spend a night within its walls. And according to countless visitors, the house is far from quiet. People report hearing the disembodied voices of children, seeing objects move on their own, and feeling sudden, bone-chilling drops in temperature. There's even a documented incident from 2014 when a paranormal investigator staying overnight was hospitalized with a self-inflicted stab wound. The house remembers. Even if the killer's name is forgotten. If these stories are crawling under your skin, and you feel the need to hear more tales of the strange and mysterious, consider subscribing to the channel. We dig into dark histories like these every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, for our final story, we move from a documented crime to a deeply personal haunting. One that reminds us that spirits can attach themselves to any home, not just the ones with infamous histories. The protective ghost of Kevin's house. He was hit by a car. Years later, he saved a life. Not all haunted houses are the sites of infamous massacres. Sometimes, the most profound hauntings happen in the most ordinary of homes. This last story comes not from historical records, but from the modern folklore of the internet, shared on Reddit by a family who moved into a new house and discovered they weren't alone. The story begins like many do. A family moving into a new home, excited for a fresh start. But soon after, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small stuff. Doors would open and close on their own. The thermostat would be changed. They'd hear faint noises from other rooms when they knew the house was empty. The family cat would often react strangely, or staring intently at empty corners, as if watching someone they couldn't see. Soon, the activity became more direct. They started finding notes written in what looked like a child's crayon handwriting. Christmas music would start playing from a stereo by itself in the middle of July. While it was unsettling, none of it felt threatening. In fact, it felt almost playful, like a child trying to get their attention. The family eventually learned the history of their home from the neighbors. A young boy named Kevin had lived there before them. Tragically, he had been hit by a car and killed right in the front yard. Suddenly, the paranormal events made a heartbreaking kind of sense. They weren't dealing with a random spirit. They were sharing their home with the ghost of a little boy who had never left. The family came to accept Kevin's presence. They noticed his activity would often increase when they were feeling sad or stressed. as if he were trying to comfort them. The most remarkable event, however, is what makes this story unforgettable. It's the moment the family became convinced that Kevin's spirit wasn't just lingering, it was actively protective. One day, a family member suffered a severe medical crisis and collapsed, unable to call for help. At that very moment, a neighbor who was just walking by felt a sudden, overwhelming, and inexplicable urge to check on the family. She later said she had no idea why, but she just knew something was wrong. At the same time, another neighbor called the police, reporting that they thought they heard screaming from inside the house, even though the collapsed person had been unconscious and completely silent. Emergency services arrived just in time, saving the person's life. The family is utterly convinced that Kevin, in his own way, alerted those around them and acted as their guardian angel. This story is a powerful reminder that the spirits left behind aren't always born of violence. Sometimes they are simply souls who are lost, or who choose to stay in a place they loved. Kevin's story isn't one of horror, but of a lingering presence that became a protector. A friendly ghost in an ordinary suburban home. What would you do in that situation? Would you be terrified? Or could you find a way to coexist? From a house built on Gallows ground, to the site of an unsolved massacre, to the quiet home of a protective child spirit, these houses hold the echoes of the past within their very walls. They stand as grim reminders that the most shocking stories are often the true ones, and that sometimes the dead do not rest. They wait. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the dark. If you have a story of your own, leave it in the comments below. Until next time, listen closely. Some houses never go silent.